and welcome to today's webinar, Evidence to Recommendations, a Guideline Workflow with GRADEpro. Before we get into the demonstration of GRADEpro, we have some exciting news. So recently, GRADEpro was awarded a grant from the Polish Agency for Enterprise Development, and this grant will support our development of GRADEpro LLM. The GRADEpro LLM project aims to create an innovative AI-powered system designed to drastically improve the accessibility in the creation and utilization of medical guidelines. The goal is to build an advanced AI system that supports the creation and publication of medical guidelines while greatly improving their accessibility to people with special needs through interactive interfaces such as voice, text, and image. GRADEpro LLM aims to achieve this by developing integrated AI assistance for data analysis and translation, an enhanced RecChat chatbot with full text interface, and advanced dynamic decision aids. So we're very happy and very excited and thankful to the Polish Agency for Enterprise Development for awarding us this grant, and we're excited to see how this will work for us in the future with our upcoming developments. So having said that, today our Justina Linska, our Customer Success Manager here at Evidence Prime, and our GRADEpro expert will take us through GRADEpro and show us how it facilitates the grading of recommendations, assessments, development, and evaluation approach to ensure guidelines are transparent, reproducible, and compliant. Thank you so much, Justina.
Okay, now we had good news. Now it's going to be even better news. First is I still got the T-shirt from the slide that you were saying. And second of all, I will show you how to use GRADEpro. Just to give a short disclaimer before I start, it's very hard to show the entirety of GRADEpro in 1 hour. So I will try to go into more detail in places we haven't mentioned in previous webinars or that we haven't mentioned in a while. But in some places, I will be guiding you towards existing webinars in which particular features or ideas are described in more detail. And today I will just briefly mention those. So that's this. Also, as you may know, GRADEpro's most basic functionalities are and always will be available for free. Some of them are meant for larger teams, for subscription holders. So I will also be highlighting when I'm showing such features to you. So to start, GRADEpro is an online software for the collaborative development of clinical guidelines. Meaning it's not a program that you download to your computer, it's something you access online. Although once you access GRADEpro once on a particular device and in a particular browser, it is saved locally in your browser on that device, and later on you can access it offline. So if you are traveling for work, for example, on an airplane and you don't have internet connection, you can continue using it. However, most of the functionalities are available online, and you can log in or register through our website. This is very simple, and anyone can do this, and that's available completely for free. It is also possible to create an account using Cochrane account if you have one already. This is webinar is putting some strain on my bandwidth, but I hope we'll manage. However, when you log into GRADEpro, what you see is the highest level of organization in GRADEpro, and those are workspaces. So workspace is like a separate bubble in GRADEpro that helps you organize your work. every person, every GRADEpro user has personal workspace. That is the free space of GRADEpro, the one that you can access without any payment. And this is where you can have your personal projects. And that workspace has no project limit, so you can have as many projects as you want there. However, the limit is on the number of users in a project, so you can have up to 3 users in a project, including yourself, inside that workspace. Separate to that is a Cochrane workspace. I don't have it with me right now on this account because it's not integrated with Cochrane account. However, that workspace is meant for the online integration with Revman Web, Cochrane's systematic review tool. That integration has been described in great detail in a separate webinar, to which we will link in the follow-up materials of this webinar, or you can find it on our YouTube channel. So that's the Cochrane workspace. And then there are organization workspaces. Those are connected to subscriptions. So if you are a member of a team that purchased such a subscription, then you will have such workspace in your account. And it will usually be named with the name of the company, and there will be logo if available. So that's the highest level of organization. And when we enter any workspace, we see the second highest, which is the project screen. That's the list of all projects in a workspace. So that's where you create projects. Project is equivalent to a single guideline. And those projects can later be accessed. Additionally, here I will mention the top header of GRADEpro because some helpful items are there too. Help button can help you access various resources, including our recently updated knowledge base, where we have various articles about how to use GRADEpro, including the GRADE handbook with information about the GRADE methodology, and feedback option, which you can use to send questions or bug reports to our team, and they will assist you. Additionally, there are settings, so you can, for example, change the language in which GRADEpro is displayed, and there is a number of languages, as you can see. And finally, there is user menu, so it gives me options to move between workspaces. For example, if I have more than one, it can help me also connect to Cochrane account if I need that. And last but not least, it can help me log out if I need to, because if that's needed for some reason. Other than that, if there are any project invitations to be accepted, they're also displayed here. I will mention this later when I say about inviting people to your team. And there are projects, and most importantly, there are options to create new project either manually or by importing. Importing also refers to files from Cochrane's program Revman, and that again was described in a separate webinar, so I will not delve into that. Creating a new project is very simple. You just create a name for it. So let's say it's actually called guideline, and basically that's it. The project is created. I'm always, whenever I create a project or if I enter a project, what I first see is the comparisons screen. That's the main dashboard of a GRADEpro project, because that's where you add questions. So clinical questions, guideline questions, which are equivalent to recommendations. Inside those questions, you have summary of findings tables, where you can summarize the results of a systematic review, evidence and decision framework, which allows to reach the final recommendation based on scientific evidence. And finally, there is also a module for presenting and disseminating the results later on. However, such work is still ahead of me as a project manager. Usually in a project, the first step would be to manage the team. However, if you are not sure what the course of project should be, you can always check it in tasks. There is a checklist, so GN and McMaster guideline checklist included, which is a list of 18 steps that can be followed to have a full a full guideline procedure created by the great methodologists from McMaster and the Guideline International Network. So each step has sub-steps which described particular actions to be taken, linked to resources if applicable for a particular step, and you can mark them as completed. You can mark them as not applicable in your case, for example, if that happens, and you can even add comments. So that's something that that's another resource that you can always refer to if you're not sure what to do next. However, now I am sure, I know that I want to manage my team, and this differs a bit between free and between free accounts, so the personal workspace, and the organizational workspaces. If I am in my free personal account, then I can invite any person who has a GRADEpro account. Anyone who has an active GRADEpro account can become a member of my project. I can do this by clicking on the Add Team Member button, and I just need to enter the email address of that person and their details and the access rights I want to give them to my project. There are two access rights to give. Admin has basically the full access to a project. A researcher is more focused on the data entry, and for example, researcher doesn't have access to the team tab, so they cannot share the project with anyone else. I can enter anyone here, and anyone who has a GRADEpro account, and they will receive invitation to the project. And by invitation, I mean notification inside GRADEpro. So I was mentioning to you earlier that I can see notifications at the top of my screen. Those are invitations to projects that I can accept. It's important to note that those invitations arrive only in GRADEpro and not via email. So that's something important to underline, and that's for free accounts. However, in organizational workspaces, I have another option because I have a limited list of people to invite. Those people are other members of my workspace, so other members of my subscription team, and only those people can receive admin or researcher invitation. This is done to limit the possibility of, for example, sharing confidential data with someone from outside of your team if you misspell their email, for example, and accidentally invite someone else. Here, it's impossible. Only people from those lists can receive such invitation. And that's how can be done. I will show you now in a full guideline how such a list might look. I can have a variety of access rights, admins and researchers, and you will notice that some people have no access here. This is because additionally in GRADEpro there is another way you can interact with the project. So apart from managing it and entering data, you can also partake by answering online forms to give feedback on various levels of the guideline process. Namely, those are questions and outcomes generation, where questions and outcomes to be considered in the guideline are brainstormed and then prioritized, and then panel voice. So that is when the guideline, the recommendation itself is being discussed and the evidence is assessed. Those can involve experts that are not necessarily guideline experts, but they are experts in the domain that the guideline refers to. So they can be doctors, they can be nurses, they can be patients, because various interest holders should be included in that process. Those people, they don't necessarily need to access GRADEpro. They don't necessarily have time to learn yet another software and how to access it and remember yet another login and password. So that's why we allow to add them as people who don't have access, and this way you can add anyone to a project. So they don't need to have a GRADEpro account at all, and they don't even need to be a member of the workspace. They can be anyone as long as they possess an email address. And if you mark them as a panel member, they will receive forms on the stages that I mentioned, and I will also mention those stages later on as I proceed. But it's important to remember that even if I invited someone with no access, for example, let's say Galileo here has no access, and I decide that I do want him to participate more in the project, perhaps he can help me enter some data. If I change his access to researcher, then it shows that there is an pending invitation, so that now he needs to accept it. But it could happen that this information would momentarily change back to no access. That means that that would then mean he is outside of the organization, outside of the workspace, and I first need to make sure he is in the workspace before I can invite him to a project. And to add someone to a workspace, you should contact here for paid subscriptions. That's when you contact either your organization admin or GRADEpro support team, because both them and us can help you. When you have a team and they will be discussing on recommendations, you may also want to manage the conflicts of interest. So make sure that the conflicts are recorded and then managed if someone is in conflict with any aspects of the guideline. There is a number of forms available, including a form of conflicts of interest endorsed by the WHO. We can preview the forms. So they basically list various aspects in which people can have interest that can deem them in conflict with a particular area of guideline. And those forms can be sent to people via email. So that's where panel members first can receive a form. So people who are marked as panel members here in the team, they are the ones who will be receiving the conflict of interest forms and hopefully completing them so we can assess it. And as you can see, the green ones are for Niels Bohr and Galileo Galilei, so they completed the forms. And I can mark, once I preview the type of interest they declared, I can mark the questions to which they are in conflict. For this questions list to be available, those questions need to be first added in the comparisons section. So here, as long as there are questions here, I can mark people as conflicted with those questions in the conflict of interest part. And this marking will become relevant during the panel voice process, which I will mention later on. So that's the moment when I have my team collected and conflicts of interest are recorded. Then I can move to determining the scope of the guideline. This can be done in two ways. So you can do this outside of GRADEpro, or sometimes this is even known beforehand, especially, for example, if it's a guideline update. However, there are cases when this you may want to consult your panel of experts to tell you which guideline questions are of most interest to be answered in that domain, or which outcomes are best to measure those questions with. And this can be done through a series of forms. Those were discussed in a lot of detail in a separate webinar to which we will provide you the link, but to briefly mention it, it is a series of stages, and each stage is first we have brainstorming, when you share a list of potential questions with your panel and the panel members can suggest their own questions. Then you deduplicate that list if needed. Then the members prioritize, so they receive online forms in which they see a list of either questions or outcomes, and they mark the priority on a scale of 1 to 9. And then you see the results of that, and based on that priorities, you can determine which of the questions and which of the outcomes are to be addressed in the guideline. You make the final list. The list is approved by the panel members, and then the process is finished. As I mentioned, this can be done. This was addressed in a separate webinar. Once we know the questions and outcomes, there comes the systematic review part, which is done outside of GRADEpro. It can be done in a variety of softwares. You can consider Laser AI, which is the sister software of GRADEpro for systematic reviews. The webinar about it was about last month, I think, and it's also published on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out. But let's imagine that the whole tedious process of systematic review is now done, so we can come back to GRADEpro. Systematic review, of course, always produces a list of references that inform the decisions, and that list of references can be uploaded into GRADEpro. It can be imported in bulk from files such as EndNote files, or if needed, single recommendations can be added. Single references can be added manually by just using the add button and entering the details that you know about the reference. But then you have the list. Of course, the list can be sorted by the authors, by the title, by the publication year, and so on and so forth. And those references can be then used and referred to throughout the project. So now we come to the crucial part, which is the entering of data, and that is done by creating of questions. So if you want to, even if you are using GRADEpro just for the sake of summarizing the results of a systematic review in a summary of findings table or evidence table, what you need to do is you need to create a question. And we have a few types of questions. We have management questions, which have the structure of should intervention versus comparison be used for health problem or population. That is the PICO structure, and they are usually, as the name suggests, used for the purpose of determining management issues. So like which medication is best for curing particular type of disease, for example, or addressing a medical problem. There are also diagnostic questions, which have a different structure. So they have the structure of should indexed test be used to diagnose target condition in health problem and population. And they assess the accuracy of diagnostic tests, or they can even compare two tests with one another. So if you click the plus button, you can add a comparator test if you want to compare two tests. And finally, there is a multiple comparison question, which can compare multiple interventions simultaneously. I will mention it briefly later on, but again, this was described in detail in a recent webinar, so it will not be, I will not go into much detail here. Of course, the questions can be reordered once I create them by dragging and dropping. They can be edited, so the arrows here are used to unfold the question, and I can edit it. I can copy it using this particular icon if I want to duplicate a question, and of course I can delete it. Luckily, if I do it by mistake, first I'm being asked if I want to, but if I do, still I can undo with the notification up here. And as you can see, the notification is up here for a long time, so I can restore it, even if I clicked on it accidentally. Each question, let's start with the management question. Each question holds inside a structure for evidence table. We have various structures available, including GRADE evidence profile created by the GRADE working group, and summary of findings table, which is endorsed by Cochrane, with a number of modifications that were created during the years based on various projects that we cooperated with. And those tables are populated with outcomes. So if you want to add evidence for an outcome research during systematic review, you just click the add outcome button, or it can be imported from a RevMan file as a project. But if you add manually, you see the whole basis for the whole structure of an outcome that you can add in GRADEpro. So you define the name of the outcome. So let's say, for example, mortality. You define the type, so whether it's dichotomous, so binary data, basically yes or no. Continuous is for outcomes when there is a spectrum of data. So for example, blood pressure, because it has definitely way more than two values. Time to event outcomes are meant for the survival. So when it's not the outcome itself is important, more like time that it takes to reach it. And finally, there are narrative outcomes in which you can just describe the results in words if it's impossible to give like a precise numeric value. Mortality is, of course, a dichotomous outcome, so I will stick stick to that. I can also define the length of the follow-up if I want to, so I can show the mean, median, or a range if there were various values for various studies. And then I can also define, let's say, the type of data. So pooled means the data came from meta-analysis and were subject to it, so I will have more options to enter. Not pooled means that there was no meta-analysis performed. So, for example, I won't be able to enter relative evidence for that particular outcome. Range of effects, as the name suggests, you just provide a range of effects, and the other three define like how the study was, how the data was collected from studies. So if it was from a single study, or if the outcome was defined before the systematic review but was not measured or not reported in any study, then this can be also marked. And in this case, the entire row is just like blocked from entering any content. That's how the outcome can be added. I will now present, let's say, full completed table to give you more idea what it looks like. So I have basically all the outcomes from my systematic review. The table is, I will be presenting mostly on the GRADE evidence profile, but the structure is quite similar between tables. So you have always the summary of findings part, in which you present numeric data, so like values for the intervention and comparison groups, and relative and absolute effects in cases when it's relevant. As I mentioned, if you mark the data as not pooled, so not coming from a systematic review, this option will be blocked. And then there's certainty assessment part. In GRADE evidence profile is quite robust. So each GRADE criterion which determines the certainty of evidence is listed separately. Just at the end, there are other considerations which collects more items, but other than that, everything has its separate cell compared to, for example, summary of findings table, in which all certainty is decided in a single cell. But that's the main difference basically between the two. And then so once you have the numeric data entered, you can move to certainty of evidence assessment. So you define the study design between randomized trial and non-randomized study, and then you define the assessment for each item in the certainty of evidence. I will not go into details how those are assessed. I'm at the GRADEpro, we assist you with using the software, but we are not GRADE specialists. To learn in detail how the assessment is performed, I recommend either contacting the GRADE working group itself, finding their webinars or the workshops they perform, or contacting the InGuide program at McMaster University. They also provide training in that respect. Basically, the assessment is performed, and then you have the final certainty of evidence, and then basically the table is completed. You can also equip it with more details by attaching references or explanations. References are connections to the papers that you uploaded earlier, and they can be added by clicking on any cell in the table with your right mouse button and selecting, references. And I can select from the entire list. I can, of course, search through that list and just mark checkboxes next to the references I want to attach. Alternatively, there are also footnotes or explanations, which can be used, for example, to explain why certainty was downgraded for particular criteria of GRADE certainty. So, for example, if I say that there's a serious risk of bias, then I can again click here with my right mouse button, click explanations, and either select one of the existing ones or add a new one. And let's say risk of bias detected. And when I save it, it's added to that cell. Any cell basically can be edited, the content can be edited by clicking on it just with your mouse. And when you click with your right mouse button, you can attach explanations or references, as I mentioned. Sometimes this option will be grayed out. So if I click here, I cannot do this. This is because references and explanations are attached to a particular field. So for example, this cell, the assessment for imprecision, holds only one field because I can only select one value on a scale of not serious to extremely serious. However, this cell, other considerations, contains 4 fields. There are 4 aspects to be assessed here. So to attach explanation to any of them, I need to first click on that cell to open this window, and only then click on any of those criteria and then add an explanation or add a reference. Additionally, for 2 criteria, for risk of bias and for indirectness, there are additional tools attached. So for risk of bias, you have a risk of bias tool, which is based on Cochrane's risk of bias. So it allows you to assess various criteria of risk of bias for each reference attached to this particular outcome. The references that you see here are taken from this cell, so they have to be attached to that cell as references, and then they can be found here in this option. Indirectness also has a separate assessment tool, but it's a bit more simple. It's a series of auxiliary questions that can be answered to reach the final judgment. Yes, so this table is when we have the evidence, and now to move from evidence to recommendation, there is the evidence decision framework. So this is a list of 12 criteria created by the GRADE working group to assess evidence and other aspects that will influence the recommendation. So it is in fact benefits and harms, but it is also patient values, the economic aspects of the interventions, equity, acceptability, feasibility, and quite recently the planetary boundaries, so the environmental aspects. They can all be populated with evidence. So there's each criterion has the same structure. So there is middle column for research evidence, where you can describe the evidence verbatim, or you can insert an evidence table from elsewhere in the project. Inserting is quite simple because when you click here, you have the option insert, and I can choose which question to take the table from. So there can be many tables from many questions, which format to use for the table, and even which outcomes to use. So I have very many options to insert the tables, so they can serve as sources of evidence. Yes, and that's how the research evidence can be described here. There is the field for additional considerations, which can be completed during the discussion of the panel. And finally, there's the judgment. So that's the answer to a guiding question. Each criterion has a guiding question. So for example, for desirable effects, this is how substantial are the desirable anticipated effects, and the judgment goes on a scale from trivial to large, or panel can say that there are various values here, or that they don't know. How those questions are answered can be done in 2 ways. You can just have a live meeting in a conference room, present this on a screen, and have people voting with raising their hands as they speak. Or you can use the feature we call panel voice. So this feature takes that form and turns it into an online form that you can send to your panel. So they can access this through a link they receive via email. And on that link, they can mark their answers to each question. They can also leave comments if they want to, and they can send those answers to you. So you can then preview them. In GRADEpro. So for example, here such voting was done, and I can see the results. So I can see that some people voted small benefits, others said there are large benefits. This is anonymized, but I can also make it not anonymous to see particular answers. And also it is possible to limit the voting so that people don't give you a large variety of answers, but you suggest the answer to them. And what they do is just they answer whether they agree with your suggested judgment or disagree, and that's how it's limited. This form is sent to the panel voice module. Panel voice itself also was discussed in a separate webinar, and it's quite one of our most complex modules. So I will not go into large detail here, but I will mention, because I mentioned this before, at some point in the voting, when you decide on the recipients, that's where the conflict of interest that we marked before comes into play. So I have the list of potential recipients of the voting, but those who were marked as conflicted are automatically excluded, and I have to use this toggle just to see them, to make sure that I don't send it to them accidentally. So that's how it's done. Of course, you can also select various elements of the ETD to be sent for voting. That's up to you. Once those elements once the voting is completed, then you see all those votes summarized in the final table, and based on this, you can make the final recommendation. You can decide on the strength of recommendation, whether it's strong against the intervention or strong for. You can enter the text of recommendation, remarks, and additional considerations if applicable. So that's when the hard part, let's say, is behind you of dealing with the evidence. This was shown to you on an example of a pairwise comparison. So we have one intervention against another. The same can be done both for evidence table and for ETD table. The same can be done for multiple interventions simultaneously. So we have network meta-analysis tables recently, which allows you to present multiple interventions and multiple outcomes simultaneously. This was discussed on a webinar by my colleague Bart earlier on, and we will, of course, share that link. So that's the table. And while it does say NMA in the name, quite recently we made it possible to also import results from a regular summary of findings tables. So even if you don't perform NMA, such a combined table can be used, for example, to combine results from a variety of summary of pairwise summary of findings tables. And this can be done for the evidence table, and for ETD there is also the multiple intervention version that I mentioned earlier. It also had its separate webinar recently, but just to briefly show you, it's an ETD table built very similarly to the regular one. The difference is that when I make the judgment, I make this judgment simultaneously for many interventions across many outcomes. I can make separate intervention for each outcome, but I can also make them the final overall decision for each of the intervention. And at the end, I can make separate recommendation for each of the intervention, and then issue many texts of recommendations at the end, just to make one combined decision. So instead of asking whether it's better to use option A or option B, I'm answering the question like, which of 5 options is the best, for example, in a given scenario. When you have the recommendations ready, you can move to publication, and there is a number of ways this can be done. First of all, you can prepare the guideline document. So some teams are focused on recommendations as basic units of a guideline, but others prefer to have a full document with recommendations being just parts of it. That document can be prepared in GRADEpro. So we have a module which is the document sections. This is where a document can be created. So there are chapters that you can add, and you can also embed them into one another by dragging and dropping. Those chapters can be equipped with text boxes to be populated with text. This is similar to any online collaborative text editor that you ever seen. So, for example, Google Docs or something similar, because you can edit it with multiple people. You can leave comments to make sure that the details are polished, and also it is possible to edit it in a track changes mode. So this part, for example, has been entered by someone in a tracking changes mode, and I, as a guideline editor or a guideline admin, have to yet accept or reject that change. But that person cannot edit freely on their own. They have to make suggestions that I yet need to accept. So that's one of the possible steps towards publication. This document can be exported in a Word format, or it can be published online using one of our solutions, to which I will move. If you want to publish single recommendations, this can be done for free from GRADEpro, because every question, apart from the evidence table and ETD that I was describing earlier, those questions also have presentations modules. So those are formats which are prepared based on the ETD. We have 3 formats for clinicians, patients, and policymakers, depending on the audience that you want to refer this to. And those formats differ a bit in things they consider. So clinicians is focused on the research results itself. Policymakers also include aspects such as the implementation of the solution, because they have to make sure that the for example, healthcare system can have that. And patients' presentation is prepared in a lay language so that patients can understand this easily. Those 3 formats are used as a basis to publish in GRADEpro's database of ETDs and guidelines. So in this database, any GRADEpro user, even if they are free non-paying users, can post their findings. So you see the question that the recommendation was answering. You can see the recommendation itself, background information, as well as data available in the summary of findings tables, and also the evidence to decision framework. So this can be published by anyone. You just need to go to the dissemination part of your project, and there's the database of GRADEpro's ETDs and guidelines. If I go here, I have the list of all my evidence profiles, which I can publish, and then they will become available online through a link to which, for example, I can link from my paper. That's the free method. Other methods which are available for subscription holders are, for example, decision aids. So here you can create an online form which supports patients in making decisions. This, which is prepared in GRADEpro, is quite simple. So it's similar to an infographic, but you can make it visually appealing for the patients to understand more easily, but we can also make a more robust one for you if you order such a service. Additionally, we can also provide you at the end with publication platforms, so you can publish your evidence in various forms. One example is the World Health Organization platform for reproductive health guidelines. So you can access the entire guideline. You can see the recommendations that were made in that guideline, but you can also access the text of the guideline itself. And if you come across a recommendation that was embedded in that guideline, you can, if it's of interest to you, you can click on it and see more information behind that particular recommendation. Another example is the portal we made for the Canadian post-COVID-19 guidelines, which additionally presents recommendations on a grid of populations and interventions, and also has a separate list of recommendations which were made in plain language to make this more easily accessible for the patients. Last but not least, there is also the visual clinical guideline that we co-produced with American College of Physicians, and that's a one-page presentation of an entire guideline. This too we plan to present in a separate webinar, so I will not be going into much detail here, but as you can see, it is quite a visually appealing presentation of an entire guideline, including the evidence that can be selected by persons, so to see which of the comparisons I want to preview. I can see the recommendations, their strength, their certainty, and rationale behind them if I'm interested. So that's the entire process. I know it's a lot. Just wanted to highlight that while the portion of GRADEpro is available for free, so that's not basically the evidence analysis, so creating the evidence tables, that's and everything that goes with it. So for example, attaching references and so on, that's available for free. All the extra features like sharing with a number of panels or creating those more interactive presentation formats are subscription based, and we encourage you to consider this for your projects. This is all from my end, and I guess we can move on to the questions now if we have any, and I see we have a number.
Thank you so much, Justina. Yes, it does look like we have a number of
Okay, so I will perhaps start with the first one. Maybe if I can go back to sharing, because this will some of the questions I can see require showing. So one is quite a common question. So what if, because I said that when you enter an outcome in GRADEpro, you have to determine whether its study design is randomized trial or non-randomized study. So what happens if an outcome includes studies of both types? The answer is, well, that they cannot be connected, and this is for a very simple reason. They have different baseline grade certainties. So when you have a randomized trial, the basic grade certainty is high on a scale of high, moderate, low, and very low. And you basically just downgrade a single level every time you select a serious, and 2 levels if you select very serious. But you start with high. With non-randomized studies, you start with low. So as you can see here, we have a randomized study. There were not any downgrades, and still the level of certainty is low. Because those levels are different, they cannot be connected. So what can be done in such cases is the teams that use GRADEpro, they used 2 strategies in the past. One was to just present 2 outcomes. So if I, for example, if I had for mortality, I had both randomized trials and non-randomized studies, then I would have just 2 outcomes, like mortality and randomized in brackets, and then mortality and observational in brackets. That was one tactic. Another was, and that's also an option, to determine that since there is evidence from randomized trials available, then those teams were just not presenting the evidence from observational studies. So that's here. Another one, because looking just to, since I already have the GRADEpro here, there is a question about different ETD frameworks available, and yes, the answer is yes. In the project setup, you have ETD templates, and for each type of questions, you can select different ETD templates. You have to edit. There is a number of templates available, including WHO Integrate, template. And in some cases, you can also change the languages. They're not available for all templates, but for a portion of them, and the templates can also be used in a different language. So those are the ones that are available. Also, in each template, you can always disable one of the criteria if you don't want to consider it. However, this change, as any change of ETD template, is like project wide. So all the ETDs in a project all have the same template. So if you make one change, this will affect all the ETDs. It is also possible to add one custom criterion if you need that. And then, of course, you have to change, you have to save the changes. Is there any AI integrated in GRADEpro? So as Kirsty mentioned, we are now in a grant with which we want to implement more. So the grant we plan, I think, for 3 years, but already this year we want to start adding new features. So keep your eyes open, and we will certainly be sharing that in our newsletters and conferences that we attend. Already now, what is available is rec chat. So for cases when you have many recommendations. So for example, here the post-COVID project had, I think, around 120 of them, but there was a rec map which included all the evidence about COVID published anywhere in the world, which was around 12,000 recommendations. So we created a conversational chat to search through that. It was also shared on one of our webinars. Currently, such a chat is available on a new revised version of Gradebook, so the Grade Handbook. And so if you type any question here, like how to rate decision, it's a chat, and it will give you a summarized answer once it thinks about it. It was, yeah, so there's the summarized answer and also links to particular articles in the Gradebook that it's taking the information from. So that's like an easier way to search through a repository of information. That's what's available now, and more will be coming. Can you upload references from EndNote? Yes. Can you author text to guideline in non-English languages? So the way you complete the guideline, for example, the document, the language you complete it in is up to you. So I can be writing here in English, or I can be writing in Chinese or Czech language. That's all up to me. However, GRADEpro itself is available only in a number of languages, so those are the ones that are available, and those are the ones that you can choose. However, the content is up to you. So even if some labels will not be correct, you can export the tables and edit it in a Word document, for example. And how do you have the list of all these references videos? I think we will be sharing them with the recording of the webinar. If not, you can very easily find them if you go to YouTube. Oh, for example, here, that's already showing. There's the Evidence Prime channel. You have videos, and those are all the webinars from GRADEpro and from Laser AI, but we have also playlists just for GRADEpro, for example, here, GRADEpro webinars and demos, and there will be a list of all GRADEpro webinars made earlier together with the titles. So if you don't see the list of results, the list of references in our communication, you can always access them directly on our channel. Yes, and how to purchase a GRADEpro subscription? I think it's quite easy, but I think maybe it's best for Kirsty to answer because she's the master behind it.
Yes, thank you so much. So if you're interested in purchasing a GRADEpro subscription, you can visit our website, as Justina is showcasing, and have a look at our pricing. So we have our free version, of course, but that doesn't include all of our paid features like panel voice. And then we have our team subscription that includes up to 15 users and 25 questions per project or guideline. If your team doesn't fit nicely within the team subscription, you can always email me at kirsty.watson@evidenceprime.com, and we'll be able to discuss your needs and hopefully get you set up with GRADEpro.
Yes, and I guess the list of webinars is in the chat. So also like people who are asking about it, I think they should see it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Justina, for that in-depth demo of GRADEpro, and thank you to everybody for attending today's webinar. Again, this has been recorded, and we will share the recording with you. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer any of those questions. So thank you once again for spending your time with us, and we hope to see you in future webinars. Thank you so much, everybody.